Hello students, today we will be looking at a theory of development given by Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson was also a psychodynamic theorist who followed most of the principles formulated by Sigmund Freud, who was the originator of the psychodynamic approach. Erik Erikson called his theory psychosocial development. He agreed with Freud on most of the basic ideas in psychodynamic theory, that is, that early experiences are very important in the development of an individual. He also agreed about the different levels of consciousness and that there is a conflict at each stage of development. He also believed that development occurs in stages and that at each stage we have to resolve the crisis which we face. The main point on which he disagreed with Freud and thus came out with his own theory of development was on the nature, the social nature of development. He stressed that rather than the sexual nature of development, which was stressed by Freud. Erikson was an ego psychologist. He assumed that human beings are basically rational creatures whose thoughts, feelings and actions are largely controlled by the ego. Here again he differed from Freud, who laid a lot of emphasis on the unconscious. As I told you earlier, he emphasized on the social nature of development. He also expanded Freud's theory by developing 8 stages of development as against the 5 outlined by Freud, because he believed that development occurred across the lifespan and did not stop at adolescence. In his theory of psychosocial development, Erikson stressed that children are active, adaptive explorers who seek to control their environment rather than passive beings who are slaves to their biological urges and molded by their parents. So, he stressed the child as an active explorer. He formulated 8 major stages of development spanning the entire life from conception, from birth up to death. Each of these stages consists of a unique developmental task that confronts the individual with a crisis that should be resolved. This crisis is a turning point. It is not something which is traumatic as the name would suggest, but it is a time for personal growth or failure as you make of it. He gave examples from history of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, whose success or whose personal growth he believed was a result of the fit between their own personal crisis and the crisis of their times. Their solutions to these crises or their ways of resolving these crises were very helpful in resolving larger social problems. So, the time of the crisis which you face during each of these developmental stages could lead to personal growth, but it also could lead to failure. It depends on how we resolve this crisis. Each crisis, as I said, has both a positive and a negative outcome. For example, one stage in which you can gain autonomy or you would experience shame and doubt. Ideally, the individual develops a favorable ratio in which the positive outcome dominates the negative. That is what happens in most cases. And the more successfully you resolve your crisis, the healthier will be your development. So, according to Erikson, the more easily or the more successfully you are able to resolve this conflict, you will develop what he calls ego strength. And so, through these developmental stages, you go from strength to strength. He also believed that as you go through these stages, you are mastering certain skills and gaining knowledge, and this leads to a positive outcome. And he believed that this also adds to your development as a person. The main theme in his theory of development, he believed that everyone was engaged in a quest for identity. That was the main theme in the development of an individual. Identity, according to him, is the understanding and acceptance of both the self and one's society. So, you need first to understand yourself and then what society wants from you. And he believed that this identity, personal identity which you develop, keeps changing as you interact with the social world. So, you begin with your family, then you move on to the school, the peer group, the teachers, your friends and so on, and that is how at every stage you are testing who you are with the people you are interacting with. As he says, throughout life we ask this question, who am I? That is the quest for identity, and you form a different answer at each stage, because at each stage your interactions are with different people and of different types, and every time you ask this question and you get an answer, the end of each stage the child's sense of identity is reconfirmed at a new level. So, if we look at these 8 stages in detail, we will understand what are these different ways in which we form our final identity. Although the development of identity reaches a crisis during adolescence, it first begins when the baby first recognizes his mother and first feels recognized by her, when her voice tells her that she is somebody with a name and she is good, she or he. So, when the mother speaks to the child and she or he understands that she is a person and she has a name. So, when you call out to somebody, suppose I say Sharon, you understand then that you are somebody and that you are good when your mother calls to you. So, that is the beginning of the quest for identity, which reaches the crisis during adolescence. Now, let us look at the psychosocial stages in detail. As I told you, there are 8 stages. I will just outline the 2 polarities at each of these stages. The first stage, which lasts from birth to the first year, the crisis is between basic trust versus mistrust. The second stage of development, from 1 to 3 years, is all about autonomy versus shame and doubt. The third stage, from 3 to 6 years, involves initiative versus guilt. From 6 to 12 years, children are struggling between industry versus inferiority. Identity versus role confusion is the conflict between 12 to 20 years. That is the adolescent period. 3 more stages were outlined by Erikson. Intimacy versus isolation, which is the age of young adulthood between 20 to 30 years. Generativity versus stagnation, 30 to 60 years. And the last stage of development, which he called integrity versus despair, that is 60 years onwards. So, these are the 8 developmental stages as outlined by Erikson. Looking at the first stage, which is from birth to 1 year, that is basic trust versus mistrust. The question that the child asks of his environment is my world predictable and supportive? This is what he is trying to seek from his environment. And the child, as he experiences his first year of life, will either develop some form of trust in the world around him, or he will develop mistrust. If the parenting, the caregiving, which is normally by the mother, is warm and responsive, infants gain a sense of trust. They get a sense of security, which forms the basis for their further development. and they feel that the world is a safe place, a secure place, and it is good to be alive in this world. But in some cases, if the parenting or the caregiving is rejecting or it is inconsistent, that is, sometimes the mother shows love, sometimes she doesn't bother about you, then the infant grows up to view the world as a dangerous place, which is filled with untrusty or unreliable people. It's very important at this stage, in the first year of life, that somebody is there for the child, whether it is the mother or whether it is the caregiver or anybody who can show this consistent behavior and give the warm, responsive care which is crucial at this stage. The mother or the primary caregiver is the key social agent. At each of these stages, there is one key figure, a group or an individual who influences the growing child. The positive outcome of this stage is trust, hope and optimism. And this is really the basis for a normal developing personality, very, very crucial. The next stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. The question that the child asks is, can I do things myself or must I always rely on others? Now, the child is growing, walking around and is learning many new things. He is trying to use his physical and motor skills to explore and understand the world around him. He must learn to be autonomous, and they learn by the time they are 3, they must learn how to feed themselves, how to dress themselves, how to do many things for themselves. And they become autonomous, they can do things for themselves. And this is fostered if parents give a chance for the child to do things for himself. If they do not do that, if they continue to chide the child for making mistakes and they do not allow the child to do things for themselves, the child will feel shame and will doubt the very ability to do things for himself. So, using new mental and motor skills, children want to choose and decide for themselves what they want to do. The next stage, 3 to 6 years, is when the child's social world is expanding. He is probably likely to be going to school. The crisis is initiative versus guilt, and the question is, am I good or am I bad? That is the question for which the child is seeking an answer. Through make-believe play, which children indulge in this stage of development, they experiment with the kind of person they can become. So, you often see them playing mommy, daddy, doctor, nurse, teacher. This is very common at this age. It is not just simple play, but they are exploring the different kind of people they can be. They develop the ability to try new things, which is what initiative is all about, and they learn also how to handle failure. These are the developmental tasks. Initiative develops when parents support their child's new sense of purpose and direction. They try to be grown up children and want to try to accept responsibility, which is what increases initiative. Sometimes they undertake goals or activities which they are not able to do, and these conflicts, or which may clash with what their parents want them to do, and these conflicts with the family may make them feel guilty. So, successful resolution of this conflict, that is between initiative and guilt, requires a fine balance. The positive outcome is purpose and direction and the ability to start your own things, own activities, that is initiative. And here again the family is the key social agent. Even though the child is going to school, the family still plays a very important role in their lives. Industry versus inferiority is a crisis when the child goes to school, starts going to school, formal schooling. And here the children have to master a whole lot of skills. And so the question they ask of themselves is, am I competent or am I worthless? You must have felt this when you first started going to school and started learning new things. Not only do you have to master academic skills and learn the 3 R's, but you also have to learn to cooperate and to get along with others, which is social skills. And this is the period when the child is constantly comparing himself or herself with their other peer group. When at home or at school they have some negative experiences, they will develop a sense of inferiority. But if they are sufficiently hardworking or industrious, they will acquire both the social and the academic skills and to feel self-assured. And the positive outcome of this stage is competence in intellectual, social and physical skills. Here in this stage, the significant social agents are teachers and the peer group, that is the same age friends. School matters a lot, and the experiences which you have at school will determine to a large extent the resolution of the conflict between industry and inferiority. Now we come to an important stage in the development of the individual, which occurs between 12 to 20 years, and the crisis at this stage is one between identity and role confusion. And the question which the child asks throughout development is now at its peak: who am I and where am I going? This period is the crossroad between childhood and maturity. You are no longer a child, but you are still not an adult. And so, this is a period of turmoil, a period of questioning, a period of seeking answers to your questions. The adolescent, who would most likely have passed out of school and would now be going on for further studies or for skill development, must establish basic social and occupational identities. That means, you should know who you are, what you are going to do with the rest of your life, what is going to be your field of work, and you must determine your own sense of self. So, it is a time of soul searching for many adolescents. If you have self chosen values, you will develop a secure personal identity. But if the values which you choose to follow are imposed on you by parents or by society, which happens very often with us, then we find that we are very confused. We do not know what to do. We do not know whether to follow what our heart tells us, or to do what society thinks is right for us, or to do what our parents want for us, because we love our parents and we want to do what they choose. But often we find that there may be a conflict between these three: what the society says we should do, what our parents want from us, and what we think we want for ourselves. The positive outcome, if you can resolve this conflict, which happily most adolescents do, is fidelity. That is an integrated view of one's unique identity. But the negative outcome of it would be confusion about what are the roles you should play as an adult. Should I become an engineer? Should I become a doctor? Should I get married? All these are questions which the adolescent faces. Should I go for a job which pays me more money, or should I take up a job which makes me more happy? These are the kind of questions which is faced by the adolescent. The key social agent in this age, I think which most of you are at now, is the peer group. Friends play a very important role, more than any other social group. Having crossed the first 5 stages, we are now on the threshold of young adulthood. The crisis at this time is intimacy versus isolation. Young adults now seek companionship and love with another person. On the other hand, they may become isolated from others because they fear rejection and disappointment. So, these are the two extremes. If you resolve this conflict of facing the fear and rejection, facing the fear of rejection and disappointment, and you are able to resolve the conflict, find companionship, find love, then you will commit yourself to an intimate relationship, and mostly this results in a marriage. The social focus here is on friendships. The 7th stage of development is a conflict between generativity versus stagnation. Middle-aged adults between the ages of 30 to 60 contribute to the next generation through meaningful work, creative activities, and of course, raising a family. Their main task here is to guide the next generation. And if they are successful in this, if they care for their children and they see that they are doing it well, they will experience a sense of generativity. If they are unable to do that for some reason, they feel that they have become stagnant and they become self-centered. And also many of the people experience the risk of feeling incomplete. So, you can go through middle age feeling a sense of accomplishment, feeling what we call generativity, that you have brought forth somebody into this world, you have supported them, you have helped them to stand on their feet, and if you are unable to do this, you feel that you have stagnated and you become self-centered because of that. The social focus here is on the household, family, and the positive outcome is care, the sense of caring. Let us now look at the last stage of development, which Erikson called integrity versus despair. This is from 60 years onward, and at this is the time when the adult has more or less completed his life tasks. He sits back and reviews what he has done throughout his 60 years of life. The older adults try to make sense out of what they have done, and they either see, depending on what they have done, life as a meaningful whole where they have completed all the developmental tasks and they have guided the next generation and they feel a sense of accomplishment. But if this has not been the case, they experience a kind of despair, a sense of hopelessness, because they can no longer change what has already occurred. The social focus at this stage is on in humankind, not on any one individual. And if you have a positive outcome at this stage, you acquire or you have what we commonly call wisdom, which comes from having accomplished something and having done what all has been set out to you as a developmental task and having accomplished that. So, these are the 8 stages as outlined by Erikson. We can see the stress on the social aspect of development. Erikson's, let us now look at his contributions to developmental psychology and to the field of psychology in general. Erikson's emphasis on cultural factors and lifespan development is very important. He gave a broad perspective to a child's behavior. He showed that changes take place in adulthood as well as childhood. And here he had expanded Freud's theory, which stopped at adolescence. He increased the credibility and application of psychoanalytic theory. He talked about mostly what we can see happening, rather than as Freud did, he talked more about unconscious aspects which are not really visible in people. So, Erikson, who talked about the ego more than the unconscious, was widely accepted by people, and his theory became very well known and accepted all along the psychological world. There are some criticisms about his theory. One of them is that he is very vague about the causes of development. He does describe development very well, but the causes are not clearly outlined. He does not adequately explain how or why development takes place. Also, there is a lack of specific mechanisms of development. He has not outlined any mechanism through which these developmental changes take place. These are some of the criticisms of his theory. Girls, do you have any questions regarding the theory? Yes, Jayashree?
What happens to children who do not have this normal experience?
We are fortunate that most of us go through these stages and have these experiences. We grow up in a family, we go to school, we have the influences, we have a good peer group, and we are influenced by the school in which we go to. There are some children who do not have these normal experiences and who will not have a favorable outcome at each stage. And as I told you earlier, a favorable outcome at each stage leads to ego strength. Erikson stressed that the outcome need not be totally favorable. It never is totally favorable, but at least largely favorable, and he said we develop what we call ego strength. So, if you do not have a favorable outcome, as many of these children who do not go through these experiences, they will not develop the kind of ego strength which is present in normal people, and they may develop fragile sense of self, and they will be confused about what they should do, and they may go on different developmental paths than most normal children do.
Why his name is Erik Erikson?
Yes, that's fascinating. Actually, as I told you that he said that the essential quest for identity is what marks development, and he believed that he should have his own identity and not anybody else's. So, he believed that he was his own son, and therefore, he called himself Erik Erikson. The main thing is that Erikson modified Freudian theory in two ways. He identified important social influences on development, which was distinct from Freud's emphasis on the sexual. The other one was the notion that life is a quest for identity, and therefore, the focus was more on the ego processes rather than on the unconscious processes, which was what Freud spoke about. Of course, he added also 3 more stages to Freud's 5 stages of development. The first 5 stages roughly parallel that of Freud, but then he added 3 more stages to cover the entire lifespan. If you look at Eriksons theory, we can say that he added the psychosocial to the psychosexual, the cultural to the biological, the ego identity to the ego defenses, the normal to the abnormal, the cross cultural to the culture specific, and child observations to adult reconstructions from childhood. And of course, he added adult development to child development. So, those are a lot of contributions which Erikson made to developmental theory. Thank you.